Thank you very much. I just spent few words to introduce the frame in which we are going to do this third web talk. Probably, as already probably you know, because you take part in the previous web talks, this webinar are a part of a cultural project, Make It Visible, and together with you, together with all the experts we invite to join us, we would like to discuss the theme of artificial intelligence in the relationship with society, actual society, and so. In the next month, we organize a campus in which we would like to discover IAQOS. IAQOS, it's an artificial intelligence created by two artists, Salvatore Iaconesi and Oriana Persico. A special artificial intelligence because it works with people trying to create relationship, and we would like to bring IAQOS to Bolzano in the next month together with you. So I'm going to thank our guests, Antonella De Angeli and Riccardo Coluccini, and finally all the partners of this project. So the Youth Policy Office of Autonomous Province of Bolzano, the University of Bolzano, the Faculty of Computer Science, the Neutech Park, who hosts us on San Virtuale, this very nice and special small town, and Bruno Kessler Foundation. So I finish. I hope you are going to follow us on our social and website. We are going to make you know all the news in the next month. So you can. I hope we will see again for our campus. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Massimiliano. Antonella, if you want, you can start sharing your presentation.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to this talk. Actually, it was quite interesting to prepare it because I'm putting together stuff that I did many years ago and that is becoming more and more popular. So today I want to actually think about how we can program machines by deprogramming users. And my proposal is that can happen if we can increase diversity in the development team. But let me have...
Antonella, sorry, can you open the view so we can see?
Oh, sorry, yes, you're right.
No, don't worry.
Okay, now
thank you very much. How it works.
Put this pin down here. Okay, and now, so I know that most of you have said they know what is a bias, and I think that all of you could define a bias as a systematic distortion in cognition, perception, and memory. Today, what I want to actually deal with is the concept of attributional bias, which is the type of behavior that happens when we try to make sense of our own behavior of other people's behavior. Here, what happens mainly is that people use two sources of information. People are different when they have to make an attribution about their own behavior or people who belong to outside group. Typical bias when we explain our own behavior is what is called an egocentric bias. And here the picture you can see on your left-hand side is actually stressing how many people during this period of lockdown and social distancing have been convinced that it will not happen to them. People tend to be convinced that we are different from others and that bad, negative things will not happen to us. But even more important is what is a bias when we attribute other people, when we try to make sense of other people's behavior. And here, social psychology can actually help us to differentiate between three types of phenomenon. The first one is stereotypes. Stereotypes are a natural part of our way of reasoning. When we actually engage in process of social cognition to make sense of other people, we immediately and spontaneously use certain type of information which are immediately relevant, typically gender, age, and ethnicity. So stereotypes just help us to get a general idea on how to interact with people. Something different happens when stereotypes are consolidated in prejudice, which means our cognitive brain also brings forward some emotional reaction in the terms of positive or negative attitudes. Particularly, prejudice is actually associated to negative reaction towards people, which at their strongest point can bring to discrimination, which is actually known as behavioral bias. Now, discrimination is the basis of racism, ageism, sexism, all the type of cases where we differentiate people according to their belonging to one specific group, which we believe is inferior, different, or not worthwhile as my own group. Nowadays, discrimination in terms of behavioral representation of, it's normally quite considered from a certain number of people as undesirable. But what we need to consider is that most of us can have some sort of implicit bias. Even though we know that we should not discriminate between people, we should not consider some people as better than others, many of us still are affected unconsciously because of the society where we live by a set of implicit bias. So I strongly invite all of you, if you have never done before, to actually log in into the implicit Harvard experiment and try out one of their implicit bias. You may be surprised by that. But let's move forward in our talk. Now, on your right-hand side, you see quite a cute little animal. This is actually quokka, as one of the strange Australian animals. And now, just for a second, I'd like you to send in the chat one word, the first word which comes to your mind that you would use to describe this animal. So just take a couple of minutes and tell me in one word, what is this animal? Now, if I can see. Funny, sociable, smart, cute, scary, cute, smiley, and lovely, sweet, funny. So what is happening here is that several of us are actually attributing these little funny things as having some intention. It's sweet, it's lovely, it's funny. It's actually something which has got some resemblance with human beings. And that's actually associated to a typical cognitive bias that we all have, which is called anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism actually happens quite normally on people, and is actually beyond our own awareness, when we tend to attribute to entities which are not humans and can be objects and typically are animals, but in very important ways recently have become computers, some characteristics which belong to human beings. It's just a sort of standard schema that our brain uses in order to make sense of something which is complicated. We don't know why the little fluffy things has got this sort of happy expression, but we actually associate his expression to being happy because this is what humans do. And computers specifically have always and historically been a favorite target for anthropomorphism. Since the very beginning, they have been described as having a memory, speaking a language. They can contract viruses, to be quite in tune with the recent evolution of history. They are autonomous and in some cases much more debated. They have been described as being capable to abort things. So we have used terminology and points which resemble our own behavior in order to explain something that was difficult to explain. I don't know why it does bop. And okay, after having given these quick overviews of what are biases in social cognition and how we actually reason, sometimes in an unaware way, about things, finding association, finding similarities, and expanding these similarities, I want to give a very general overview to talking machines. And now here I saw that between the attendees, there are quite a lot of colleagues who have very strong experience in artificial intelligence. So I must apologize because the topic of my talk, it's actually on a very weak form of artificial intelligence, which is better known as chatterbots, or this type of software programs which were designed in order to simulate a conversation with a machine. Now, this thing started many years ago, and the very first and very famous idea, it's Elisa, which dates back to the 60s, and then it has evolved through a number of one. The one you can see here reported in this list are just listed here to the sake of simplicity for my presentation, because I want to take inspiration from each of them and try to see how is our idea of chatting with machine, how does it has developed through the years and what have been the difficulties. But I also want to drive your attention to the point that in the last few years, if you can see my mouse here, several examples which were released on the market has been discontinued. Some of them were in a very, very rapid way, like for instance, Taybot, which will close my presentation. Now, the first two examples, as you can say, are associated to the domain of psychological disorders. And the choice was very instrumental because it's easier to model and to pose example of conversation in a context where deviations from the rules is expected, where people can mirror my talking. Let me give you a quick example of what a chat with Elisa looked like. The patient in this case is the user, and normally they were psychiatrists who were called in to test this instrument, and start saying men are all alike. In what way? They're always bugging us about something or other. Can you think of a specific example? Well, my boyfriend made me come here. Your boyfriend made you come here. Sorry, I need to move this thing out of the way. He says, I'm depressed much of the time. I'm sorry to hear you're depressed. Now, for those of you who knows this history, you can see how here is all a game of pattern matching. Now, Elisa was actually designed in order to answer by either taking some keywords from the sentence of the user, turn it around and asking a question. This is what a psychotherapist is entitled to do. It actually reflects your talk in order for you to express your own opinion. Exactly the opposite happened with Parry, the paranoid, where, for instance, there is this idea of setting up different type of entities. There is an example here. I'm not reading it out loud now for timing issue, but you can see how Parry is capable to intertwine between the interviewer examples and this idea of being a paranoid and having to defend and breaking the rules and moving forward. But after this first example, there has been a period where the chatterbots were actually designed to reflect different type of identities. And I give you here an example of Elisa, which is one of the robots I've explored in one of my first studies, and was the Loebner Prize winner in '97. This chatterbot is interesting because for the first time she's tried to build a character, a narrative, which was not mirroring a simple communication tool, but was bringing forward a new identity. And that's what I believe is extremely important when we think about artificial intelligence, bias, social perception. The point is that these entities are different from us. Here there is a very nice interaction between a user who is actually exploring what it means to be a robot. And this type of conversation were very frequent in a number of studies we did, where we gave participants laptop and we asked them to chat for a week with the bot. This was well before the internet and the possibility to do everything online. But what we wanted to do at that point was to bring people out of the laboratory, out of the social construction of behavior which is expected by people. What happened with the study was that we start identifying a number of interesting and very constructive examples, like this interspecies disclosure, where, like in this case, where the user asked Alice, what is like being artificial? And there is this disclosure about how machine and human have a specific characteristic, what people do, and how do you expect them to behave. But in parallel, what we start analyzing was also very strong aggressive behavior on the side of the user. People very often became very aggressive and abusive towards chatterbots. So we actually did a new study where we took another chatterbot called Jabberwocky, and we collected a few hundreds internet-based conversation.
Antonella, sorry to interrupt you. 5 minutes to go.
Yeah. And in this case, we actually analyzed all the topic of conversation, discovering then 3 areas which were quite unexpected to us, were actually related to sex, morality, and verbal abuse. Consider that the database was initially cleaned by taking away 10% of the conversation, which were pure pornography. Now, one of the topics which is very much debated is the topic of gender. You can see some example here on the background. And is when the user keep asking Jabberwocky, which is actually a genderless name, what gender is the chatterbot, or attributing the chatterbot particularly a female gender. This brought forward, even in more friendly conversation, a number of references to sex. I would say that at least each participant, at least once during their talk, actually asked Jabberwocky some sort of very sexual specific proposal. That's a nice way where Jabberwocky moved out of the loop. But for sure, sex was a preferred topic of this conversation. Sometimes the relationship between the human and the machine becomes particularly aggressive, as you can say here. And the human, specifically when the machine did not know, or when the machine actually was claiming to be a human, the people became particularly aggressive. There were very clear examples of intentionality provided to the machine, like in the moment in which I call a machine a liar, it implies that what is being told was actually told in an intentional way to deceive. And what we wanted to explore in further studies was actually how the embodiment could modify or bring forward some of these behavior. So we constructed a number of embodiment, quite professional, very different from the standard one, which are on the internet, which are much more sexualized, and use the same source of a chatterbot engine where people could choose who they wanted to interact and then have a long chat. We actually confirmed the same disinhibition tendency, but we found out quite clearly that the female and minorities, particularly chatterbots embodied by Black images, were actually mistreated much more than white chatterbot. We tested how this type of behavior could be explained by the attractiveness of the chatterbot, which is a well-known predictor of preference. And we saw that nice bots were strongly preferred to not so nice looking chatterbot, and they were attributed better personality traits, which is consistent with another cognitive bias or personality bias that people hold. And one of the points I introduced at the beginning was that if at the beginning they started to have prescriptive statements, then this idea was to actually use the input of the users in order to instruct the chatterbot. And this is an example of type tweets, which was proposed in 2016 by Microsoft. Some people say that it was released by mistake, but in 16 hours, by learning through the type of information provided by the user, it transformed in one of the worst racist, sexist person that you could imagine. Goku is a chatterbot, and you can see here that there has been added some elements of defense. So this is a conversation I had before this presentation, in which I told Cookie to be fat, and here she actually responded to me quite in an interesting way. Now, There has been Amazon, which is listening to us and is entering more and more our life. And recently has actually been involved in a case in which a woman was dying, asking for help to Alexa. And here is where we become, as users, aware of the fact that the idea of learning from the users is not direct anymore. There are people reading these logs and making sure that they cut out the worst of that. The big market at the moment, it's actually on sex, and there are possibilities not only to build your chatbot, but to build your artificial lover, specifically women, once again, and you can select clearly all the type of physical aspect they want before it is shipped out to you. Okay, I know I'm running a couple of minutes later, but I'm ready to close. And I want to close with a question, actually having people to reflect if any of it is better. I mean, is it important anyway to mistreat or to be racist against a piece of software? Does it make any type of difference? And maybe also reflecting a bit on why is this happening and why specific type of targets, specifically women and non-white people are the target. Now here, my explanation is that because nowadays most of artificial intelligence is actually constructed by a very specific demographic of people, which reflect white male actors, and they may or may not encompass other type of vision. And I like to conclude to invite you to have a look later to this TED Talk proposed by Lauren Kantz, which I was delighted to discover today is the CEO of Pandora Bot, which is one of the largest company in Silicon Valley dealing with chatbot. And with this, I conclude, and I'm ready to take your question.
Thank you very much, Antonella. Very, very interesting. I think we have a lot of questions. First of all, the debate started in the very beginning about the fact that an AI could be racist or not. And so a lot of people, Diego expressed his opinion that he said it is wrong to call the AI system racist as long as we don't have strong AI system who could be really racist. I think you answered to this question. So it's not the AI, is the programmer, so the developer, the designer, the human behind, I think. I'm going to read something, but I hope you raise your hand and express your doubt or questions. Paolo, about this fact about women in computer science, Paolo asks, Alessio, sorry, why most of these bots are female?
Well, Alessio, one of the explanations is that there has been done quite a lot of user research, bringing forward the idea that women are preferred by the people. One of the explanations is that women are preferred, particularly when they are put in a sort of minority position, like a virtual assistant, your secretary, is much more likely to be a woman. Another explanation which has been brought forward is indeed the fact that most of the developers, both of the graphical embodiment and of the conversational one, are of the opposite gender. So there may be this preference in creating these virtual women rather than men. And indeed, in some of our research, we have traced back how the embodiment were built, noticing a number of differences. When female chatterbots are designed, they are very much sexualized and they are very physical in nature, very natural. Whereas very often male chatterbots actually reflect different type of cartoon-like design. So one of the possibilities that very few females have been involved in the design of chatterbots. Another possibility is that consumer research tell us that normally females are much more adapted to communication and socialization. Another one can be a role structure, because most of these chatterbots are actually our servants or slaves. This is my interpretation.
Thank you very much. Lavinia is writing something. And Paolo asks, the last slide is a Black Mirror material. If that is a valid reference outside of the United Kingdom.
I'm not sure I understand what is the point.
Paolo, if you want, you can, I can allow you to talk. Little joke, sorry, can we talk? Yeah, obviously, okay. Now I think you can.
Yes, okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi everybody, and ciao Antonella.
Yeah.
Very nice to see you again after a long time. This is very interesting. Okay, that was a kind of a side joke because so Black Mirror is this TV series about dystopic near futures that are so near future and so plausible that are really disturbing. And that was kind of the idea there. And so one of them is actually have you order this box and inside the box there's kind of this embryonic being that you put in a hot tub, and 2 days later it blows up into the android you always wanted. It looks exactly like the robots you've seen in your slides. So that was disturbing. So I put a real question in the Q&A there about the definition of racism. And the question is whether the intent is part of it. I think Diego will kind of jump the gun at the very beginning and say, okay, well, if I don't intend to be racist, then I'm not. And I think it's a deep question that, because I can just look at the consequence of what I do, and discrimination is a consequence. And so I'm now interested in fair algorithms and fair machine learning, like most people probably here. And so I can be biased and discriminating without intending to be, but is that racism or not? And that is probably the question I wanted to ask. Thanks again, great event.
Thank you very much, because it's actually quite a complex question you're putting forward. Now, I just want to give you a bit of a background, and actually it's a pleasure to give it to you, because I've started this type of studies when I was in Dundee and when I was in Manchester, and we had the pleasure to meet there. And at that point, I just got fascinated by this idea that there was something wrong happening, this beautiful technology that at all conferences was brought forward as the solution to everything. At least in the human-computer interaction community, the idea was we will build smart agents and they will help us. They are good, they build fast. And then I start actually seeing that where people were taken out of the laboratory, when they were not immediately identifiable by you, the type of behaviors which were happening were very different. And we had a very little niche of research working on that. The question that always came out, and I can see also reflected in some of the comments by Diego, is actually, but does this matter? Is it any problem for me to mistreat and actually have a go at the machine? Maybe it's good for my health. Maybe just a sort of But the problem nowadays is that when you have a mixed community between machine and people, and you have a certain type of attitudes against the machine, how can you make sure that this does not escalate? How can you make sure that where you're actually sexually harassing a bot, and that's probably done to have fun? I'm not making any moral implication on that. You don't actually have the same type of attitudes to a real person.
Yes.
They are very complex, I believe, identification. But one of the biggest points in abuse, which we could identify in our analysis, was this fact that people felt like to be the master of the machine. There were a number of references to God. I'm God, I created you. I'm actually the best one. It's really a master-slave relationship, which was often declined in a very aggressive way. I hope we have a bit of a context.
That's very interesting, because it talks about, do we have any ethical obligations towards beings that are not human, essentially?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll give someone else a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you for the answer. And I'd like to collect two questions, because I think they are very connected, about the intent. I think Diego makes a good point about the purpose. So can we call an artificial intelligence racist, even if I think it doesn't have a purpose, doesn't have an intent? And this is connected about realism of the artificial intelligence. And Francesco is asking, okay, do you believe that in order to build a realistic artificial intelligence agent, we should also make her biased as we are? So to gain realism, we decide to fall in biases.
That's actually very interesting. And I would say that personally, I would really be willing, and that was also one of the reasons why I gladly start talking to you about your project. Try to think, to bring forward a new metaphor. Stop for a moment the human-like metaphor or the natural metaphor. Stop the idea of building robots which resemble like us, and start thinking and exploring what artificial intelligence can be as a different type of entity. So here, some of the explanation that the artist involved in your project did with the moving metaphor, to me, were really interesting. For what concerns Francesco, the question if we should be bringing forward some sort of, if we should be creating people biased, I would say that I rather try to unbiased. Try to see if we can do something different which is not biased against our own values. Because I also bias, if you think, are a subjective point. We believe that racism is negative because we live and we apply to certain type of rules. But that could be different in different cultures. So rather than creating clones of K-bots, I would rather start thinking how we can challenge. And here is where the diversity, the idea of opening it up, and that's maybe a bit of a call I like to raise to the audience, that we need more diverse people to get engaged into thinking what these agents will be, into thinking how these agents should look like, into thinking how these agents should respond. The majority, the stereotype at the moment seems to belong to the strongest discrimination against minorities.
Yeah, thank you very much. I quote Lavinia, standing ovation for Antonella. Lavinia saying, you know, we use the female shaper and lexic and talking for chatterbot because we used to deal with, you know, a fragile idea of women, and this is the more biased idea we can have, and so yeah, I agree with you for sure to obtain more diversity. So we can elaborate something different. So the big question is a human able to perform and to develop something different from him or her? So, okay, with this, we will take your question. Okay, Federico, you want to speak? You want to say something? Just raise your hand, or we can take all the question in the final part. So now give the stage to Riccardo. And
thank you. Let me share the screen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see it? Is everything good?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, great. So, oops. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Antonella, for your talk. Thank you, Massimiliano and Tommaso, for having me. So my talk is going to focus on what I call poisonous datasets. Not all of them are going to be poisonous. There are going to be different levels of poison in those kind of datasets. But basically, I want to push forward this concept, as we've been discussing about bias, of considering algorithms as digital organisms. And hence, in fact, they can evolve during time. They can change their parameters. They can change their behavior. They can make decisions about themselves. We know reinforcement learning, backtracking, yet not consciously. So we still need programmers to program the code to make the decisions. And definitely, when it comes to machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms in general, they need food to develop and grow. So these are kind of digital organisms. The food they need is it translates into massive training data sets. So they need lots of data to understand what we want them to do. Machine learning systems are biased when data is biased. So there's this recurrent phrase that garbage in, garbage out, meaning that if you feed the training data full of biases, full of mistakes, full of errors, the algorithm learns from those mistakes and will reiterate on them. At the same time, we need to remember that the bias is not only in the data. Some machine learning system might be biased regardless of data. So they might be biased on how you conceive the models, how you conceive the algorithm, or even in what you're looking for. For example, if you're building an algorithm based on phrenology, which is kind of a pseudoscience, in that case, bias is in the engineering that it's conceiving the kind of algorithm. So the main point is the way you build these training datasets. I'm going to focus only on the bias within the datasets. The way you build these datasets, it affects bias and produces risks in those algorithms. And we were talking before how we should define a racist algorithm. In my opinion, we should more focus on the outcomes of the algorithms, meaning it might be that the developer doesn't want to produce a racist algorithm. The data doesn't look that much like a biased data, but at the same time, it's a proxy for some kind of, for example, racism, which is inside society. For example, if we think that we collect data according to zip codes, we might be in a situation in which that data reflects stereotypes and racism in society. So, for example, we can think of the poorest city zones, the poorest area of a city in which people live in different conditions, and those people might be affected in different ways by the algorithms. So poisonous datasets lead to dangerous AIs. what can actually go wrong? I tried to divide these datasets into 4 different types. We have datasets built on purpose from scratch. We have datasets built automatically collecting raw data. So we have raw data and we label this data, we use it to train this algorithm. We have synthetic datasets, meaning that we digitally create this data. Or we have the most juicy and worrisome ones that are the legal datasets. So it's going to be a not so fun ride on all those 4 types of datasets. So let's dig into. The first one are the datasets built on purpose. So I mean, we need to create data from zero. We don't have data. We set up to, for example, collect emotion of human beings. So we start taking pictures of people showing some kind of emotions. The way you conceive and create this data may introduce bias. So maybe you're looking for only some specific kind of data, or you're framing your question in a wrong way. So human preconceptions may enter into the final training algorithms as well. I'm going to show you some examples. The first one is the Japanese female facial expression dataset. This dataset goes back to 1998, and as you see, it's a dataset in which there are human emotions. Basically, there are more than 200 images of 7 facial expressions taken. Those are pictures taken of models, and they show 6 emotions, ranging from fear, happiness, surprise, anger, disgust, and the neutral face. Those reactions, those emotions, those facial expressions were labeled by 60 subjects. So basically, these models were required to show facial expressions, and the labelers had to pick which emotion correspond to which face. So basically, there are a couple of issues. For example, cross-culturally in the world, we may not show emotions in the same way. So we may see some facial expressions, but not connect them to, for example, happiness or surprise. So there could be this kind of biases. Another example of this kind of data set is the WordNet one, which is a lexical database. It includes names, verbs, adjectives, and it's basically a huge data set of linked terms by semantics. So basically, I took some screenshot here, for example, of the word computer, which goes down to calculator, figure estimator, or for example, intelligence, so which is connected to mind, intellect, and verbal intelligence. This WordNet, for example, has some issues. For example, those are only English words. So for example, we may have systems that are lacking vocabulary due to the fact that the language is not so used worldwide. On this WordNet, for example, is built another dataset, which is the ImageNet. Basically, for each single word, there is a picture. So we move from the semantic to the images. Another dataset is the Open Images one. This one has been collected, put together by Google. There are more than 9 million images annotated manually by people. So basically, they collected these pictures and they put this label around, which this is pretty useful for training algorithms, because basically you have pictures with labels. So they identified for example here, kangaroos, and this is quite useful for training algorithms. At the same time, they claim, in this case, is another slide, they claim to have collected images under the Creative Commons license. So basically, images that were not protected by copyright. But of course, there might be some errors, some mistakes. So in this case, we also have to think about what are the legal consequences of collecting pictures, images that are not actually allowed to be used. For example, in case of producing, I don't know, algorithms to be commercially available, or instead of like for educational purposes, because there are like different licensing agreements as well. Let's move on to the second type of these data sets. The second one is the one we built automatically collecting raw data. So there are several ways in which biases might be introduced in this case. One of them is via the instruments that are used for collecting the data. We might be, for example, introducing some prejudices on the way we collect this data. But also we still have to remember that data is a product of our society. So basically it includes human biases already. They're in there. And also if we feed our algorithms from raw data, we should remember that we can't include what's not rendered into data. So we might have blind spots, or so we might be missing some data to train our algorithm. So what does this mean? It means that, for example, maybe some part of the population, maybe, for example, minorities, are underrepresented in our databases, and this could lead to biases, racism, and other kind of outcomes. But let's have a look to some kind of these databases. We have this one, the A3D dataset, which is basically 230,000 human labeled images of cars, pedestrians, and traffic in general. This basically has been used to train algorithms for autonomous driving in order to behave in a safely manner towards pedestrians and the public in general. In this case, what's interesting to see, for example, is that not all the traffic behaves in the same way all over the world. So this becomes specific to, for example, the place in which you collect this data. This is one of the examples. Another kind of data set is the interior data set. And this is basically a data set of CAD models, so computer-aided design models, put together to create interior environments in order to help robots to move around, to find the trajectories, to basically solve some kind of behaviors. In this case, we may feed the algorithm with biases coming directly from these models. These models were provided by world-leading furniture manufacturer. So basically, we may have preconceptions regarding how the interior of our apartments look like, but this could not apply in the same way everywhere in the world. So this could be a reason for introducing biases in the final model of our algorithm. These are two other interesting examples. For example, there is the MRNet, which is basically 1,370 MRI scans of knees. And this is be used to train algorithms to look for abnormalities, to check which kind of scans present some problems. The other one is 2.3 terabyte of Hollywood kissing scenes. They basically wanted to train an algorithm to detect kissing scenes. This one were taken from, for example, Hollywood movies. So Hollywood movies could actually reinforce our own biases and prejudices, because Hollywood movies usually are more oriented toward a Western kind of spectators. So it's not that we can expect from Hollywood movies to share the same feelings, emotions that may be felt in other parts of the world. And this might be a reason to be concerned regarding this kind of data sets. And let's move to the third type, which is the synthetic data sets. So basically, you don't have data available, but you don't even want to, for example, go for real material data. You want to create it digitally. This is interesting because you have to take into account who is creating them. So again, goes into the creation of the data, the human biases. And also you have to reflect on what kind of tools are being used. An example is these replica datasets, which is a dataset produced by Facebook. And those are high quality reconstructions of indoor spaces. So we see, for example, a sofa, kitchen table. We see all those kind of results. But once again, we might be digitally creating what we think an interior apartment should look like. And this might be really worrisome because basically what we see are, for example, will look like quite expensive apartments, but these are not definitely apartments that people live in. So this is a point of concern once again. Another example is this quite interesting and quite cool research project. This is a MineRLL, which is basically Minecraft used to collect data for an algorithm of reinforcement learning. So basically, they asked people to play on this server. Minecraft is this world building server in which you basically in which you basically build the worlds you want. And they asked people to join those servers, move around, play freely, And in this way, they could collect data in order to accomplish some results, which are, for example, navigating or obtaining objects or surviving against the enemies and such. So in this way, we have an environment, a digital environment, which is a video game played by billions of people around the world. And in this case, it's been narrowed down for a specific research project to produce data. And in this case, of course, the outputs are binded to the in-game possibilities that you have. So for example, some actions can't be produced and so on. But this is a quite interesting one. Another kind of synthetic dataset is the one that has been used for the deepfake detection challenge. The deepfakes are basically videos produced by algorithms in which they are basically not real. So for example, they usually overlap faces of other persons on top of real videos, or they change what the video is actually saying. They change the wording of the video. There has been lots of discussion about these deepfakes videos, and people are worried about their use, to distrust democracies, used mainly for political purposes. But in the end, actually, they've been used to harass women and to mainly attack and share non-consensual images online. And this is quite a great concern. So Facebook devised this challenge, and they needed actually deepfakes because, okay, it's a technology that's out there, but it's not that widely used. So basically, they didn't have that much data to train their algorithm to understand which is a real original video and which one is the deepfake one. So they had to produce these deepfakes videos. So they created more than 100,000 videos, and they used it for this challenge. I think they announced the results a couple of weeks ago. And it's another example of synthetic datasets that can be produced. The fourth type is one of the most dangerous and worrisome one, which are the illegal datasets. So basically, if you want to play dirty, and you basically go and scrape the data from unaware people's accounts. So we have the web, we basically go whenever we want and we collect data. You could scrape images, you could scrape even text. For example, you can go on Reddit and scrape all the conversation, all the posts of the Redditors in there and use the data. In some cases, you are actually ending in violating the terms of services of these apps, because basically they sometimes, or better, oftentimes, they don't allow you to scrape this kind of data. And of course, there's a third issue, which is illegally creeping into people's privacy. If you collect images of pictures of people without them being aware of this, you are basically infringing their privacy, their rights. And this is quite dangerous for people. But let's have a look at some of these data sets. Megapixel is a project, is an art and research project run by Adam Harvey and Jules Laplace. And basically they want to shed light on all those data sets that were illegally collected. They basically set up this project thanks to some funding from the Mozilla Foundation, and they had been collecting instances of illegal data sets. We have, for example, the mega phase one. You can see it on your right, in which they had collected more than 4 million pictures from Flickr. So they basically exploited Flickr users, and at least trying to use they looked for the Creative Commons licenses in the system to take these pictures. But in the end, these databases were shut down after the Megapixel project, this art and advocacy project, shed light on these instances. So you can see other kind of databases, for example, the Duke MTMC. This is from camera tracking students within the Duke universities, where a bunch of other kind of examples. For example, there's the Oxford Town Centre, but also the one on the bottom left, the MS Celeb, which is basically a Microsoft datasets of celebrities, and they claim to be the greatest datasets of celebrity pictures available online. Of course, most of those people, actually, I might say total, all of them, they didn't know they were in there. They didn't know they were in these datasets used to train algorithms. And again, Microsoft closed down this kind of datasets, deeming it too dangerous. Another kind of datasets has been surging attention recently due to the COVID-19 and the fact that people have to wear masks to protect themselves and other people, face recognition system started to have issues recognizing faces. So what happened? Some researchers decided to scrape pictures from Instagram of people wearing masks and not wearing masks in order to train their algorithms and try to see if they could recognize medical mask or not. And this, of course, is infringing on people's privacy, because basically you are posting your picture on Instagram showing your cute, cool mask, but in the end, you end up feeding an algorithm, and you're not aware of this going on. But what might be the scariest thing that we heard, at least recently, is this company, ClearView. At the beginning of January of this year, a New York Times investigation basically revealed the existence of this company that scraped 3 billion pictures of people from the web illegally. So basically, no one knew about them. And the New York Times investigations called this company the company that might end privacy as we know it. They basically were selling their technology, their algorithm trained on these pictures, to law enforcement agencies, but also to private companies. So they sold it to the US and Canada, but there were like some issues and some slides that some investigative journalists got, in which basically ClearView was claiming to be expanding even in Italy, for example. And this was quite concerning. What happened? I was quite curious. I wanted to know if I was in there. I wanted to know if I was in one of those data sets. So basically, under the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, you could ask to companies to know what kind of data they have about you, how they are storing the data, how long, for what purposes. So I filed a request to ClearView, and they basically provided me with these results. This is a PDF in which we can see the face search results. I was required to send a picture of myself, the one you see labeled original search image, and they found in the dataset those 3 pictures. And each picture came together with a link of its origin. So basically, there are a picture from a website. So two of those pictures, the first 2 of those pictures, I know about them. Because the first one is in the International Journalism Festival. So I was a speaker in there, and this picture was in there. But it wasn't actually under my speaker page. It was in a speaker's page of another panelist. The second one is one of my profile pictures. But the third one is a picture taken from Couchsurfing, the hosting service in which you can share your spaces and sofas and beds with people, with couch surfers. And a friend of mine uploaded that picture in there for her profile. I didn't know I was in there. I had no idea I was in there. But in the end, my picture has been scraped by ClearView and used in their datasets. Obviously, these are like, they are clearly violating privacy of people, as we've seen with the other examples, but also there are some issues, for example, in case of the picture from the Journalism Festival, because in that case, the pictures are under Creative Commons license. But does this mean that they can be used for a commercially developed software? Or this is like kind of legal question that one has to ask itself. So to wrap up all this presentation, we need to watch out what we feed our AI with. So all these different databases carry different kinds of threats, of risk and biases. Some of them might be easy to spot, might be right in front of our eyes. Some of them might not be so easy because maybe they are proxy to other kind of biases that are unfortunately within our own society. So we can actually, definitely, we need to move to change the society in order to avoid that kind of biases, for example. So what should we do? We should try to compensate and sanitize the datasets as much as possible. So we should take into account, for example, one of the reasons we might, as Antonella was saying before, one of the reasons we might see like harassment towards women or minorities is probably because those kind of people, minorities, women, are lacking from companies or research institutions that are developing this algorithm. So basically their voices are not heard, they're not in there while thinking through how to develop these algorithms. And definitely respect to human dignity and consent are fundamental when we think about developing artificial intelligence algorithm models, machine learning systems, because definitely if they're dealing with data produced by people, if they're dealing with faces, if we're dealing with other kinds of data connected to people, and most of all, if this system outcomes have effects on people, these are things that we should definitely have in mind. So yeah, that's the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Riccardo. Thank you very much. Have an applause for our speakers both. Thank you very much for your talks. And we have some questions. So Francesco, if you want, you can speak. I can allow you to talk. Okay. If you're able. Because some, some question waved in our chat while you were talking, Riccardo, about privacy, about the ability to check all this research, and so to stop and to make the law, active, and so they can work. And Francesco, do you want our previous web talker, if you want to say something, because you wrote down in the chat?
Yeah, if you want. So I made just an observation. So we use this word bias as a negative word, which is obviously right. But what I just wanted to mention is sometimes, say, we have to use bias. It's a really a very strange situation, but most of the algorithms that are used in machine learning are trying to solve what they are called ill problems. So ill-defined problems that in practice cannot be solved, no? In the sense that the data that you have, even if they are big data, are not enough to create, let's say, this solution, unless you add this bias. The bias is essentially forcing the model to go in one direction, which then allows you to solve the problem. Now, one typical solution for this machine learning model is, for instance, to assume that the classification function, if it's a classification, imagine cat versus dogs, the classification function is a function that is linear in the variables. And most of the algorithms are biased because in reality, this classification function is not linear, but assuming that it's linear make it possible to learn the model and produce a solution. So we should pay attention to this word bias that obviously has negative meaning, but also may have also positive. Regarding the last talk of Riccardo, that I really thank because it was very, very interesting. I want just to make an observation that, yeah, there are biases in the data, and this is normal in some sense. So most of the data sets that we're using are in some sense biased, but what we're trying to do now is to build algorithms that, notwithstanding the fact that the data are biased, the solution is not biased, which is the most advanced research that we're trying to do. So I think this is also very, very interesting. So even if, for instance, there is a gender discrimination in the data, I will produce recommendations. Let's imagine that is about recommendations that are not gender biased, by the biasing in some sense the outcome. And this, I think, it's a very interesting area which has now having a lot of attention in the research community.
Thank you, Francesco. Okay, Antonella, you want to say something?
Actually, I think, Francesco, your point is really good, because maybe I wasn't really clear at the beginning, because indeed the concept of bias is always considered as something negative, but this is also the way our brain works. And exactly as your machine learning and your computer, we need these biases because they are shortcuts, because we will not be capable as human beings to rebuild things once at a time, to have to learn every time again. And that's also why, even in social communication, the point is making people aware of bias. Mm-hmm. The only way you can fight it or you can challenge it, if it becomes clear that there is a bias, or at least there is a tendency to have a certain type of preference or automatic behavior that will take you towards a route. My point here is that indeed one way that has been used a lot in social psychology, not always with great success, is that the only between humans, the only way to stop it is to increase diversity, bring in brains which have a different type of preferences or desires together. That's what is a bit scary to me of certain fields where if this diversity is not there. But I'm really happy to know that in more computational fields, there is an awareness of that and this idea of deprogramming bias which are incorporated from people. It's really very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's the point. Riccardo, do you want to add something?
Oh, yeah, it's interesting because I feel like discussing about biases in algorithm, it's helping us to understand our own biases even more than before. So basically, if at least this is my perception from not an academic perspective, basically common people now know about biases. They heard about, for example, face recognition systems that don't work properly with people of color, for example. So this is, I think, an interesting, unexpected outcome of developing artificial intelligence. It's as if it's working as a magnifying lens on our society as well. So as Antonella said, we need to work more on diversity. And this is something like that's growing more and more as a demand from the society. Also because we see that some algorithms are not working properly. So this I think it's an interesting point of view in the discussion of bias in algorithms. But definitely the work on unbiasing algorithms, it's quite a fascinating one, and I'm really interested to see how it's gonna develop.
If I can, that's very, very, very interesting what you said. I think that it's important not to make the error of thinking that the algorithm is biased, in the sense that we have to take the responsibility to understand what the algorithm is giving us and then using in the proper way, because most of the time it's not the culprit, it's not the algorithm, but it's the man that is using the algorithm in the wrong way. And which is a very typical situation, because when I discuss this with people that are not, let's say, mathematicians or computer science, they always blame the algorithm. The algorithm is biased. Yeah, it could be, sure, but if you are aware of this bias, then it's your fault. It's not the algorithm. So you cannot blame the algorithm. You have not used the algorithm in the right way.
Yeah, you know, our intent, our purpose with this project, with IAQOS, is precisely this. I mean, debating about questions, about biases, about the way machine learning and artificial intelligence works. And so that we are probably able, we have the possibility to understand better our own behavior, our patterns, our shortcuts, because bias is neutral, it's just a simplification for our mind to reach a point in the more economical, brainly talking way. So it's normal. And with IAQOS, we want to do this kind of conversation. So using as a leverage artificial intelligence to understand better how we build up relations and social innovation. This is our point. And Lavinia, do you want to add something, because you are very active in our chats during all our web talk, and so if you want, you can say something. Here you are. And you post to our attendees very interesting articles. Okay. Okay.
Wait, yes. Hi. Yeah, what I just posted is the website of an organization which does a great job, I think, at making the general public aware of issues in biases and they work specifically on the interactions between, well, data and society, as the name explains really well. And yeah, I think it's super important to focus also, as you were saying, on the fact that it's not the algorithms which are to blame for the biases, is the programmers behind it, and definitely the fact, as we have seen, that it's mostly white males developing these algorithms. I believe it definitely shapes then the outcomes that we get. I'm thinking about the presentation in the beginning by Antonella and in chatbots, and I was wondering, would we have, for example, the same physical features for these virtual chatbots if it wasn't, if it was, I don't know, an indigenous person from Australia? Would they look like, you know, white, blonde-haired females with soothing voices? Probably not, is my guess. So I believe there's a huge work to do on this representation issues, both in the work that goes behind it and in the outcomes and in the interaction we see.
Thank you very much. I would like to take another suggestion coming from Paolo, and he said, I believe this brings in the notion of interventions on the data before it is used for learning, so bias correcting intervention. Paolo, do you want to say something about this?
I think I just unmuted myself. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So the flip side of introducing biases is, as Antonella and others said, it's removing bias, but you have to do it in a way that is driven by a goal, and so you have to have something measurable about the model that you're learning from the data, and this is the whole world of fairness, I guess, in so algorithmic fairness, which is now just exploding with new conferences and all that. So if you walk backwards from your definitions of fairness, then and you assume that bias is inevitable, either because you introduce it deliberately or because it just comes with the data that you harvest, then what stands in the middle is, okay, what kind of interventions are able to correct the bias so that the result is a fair model, and B, what interventions actually legitimate to do, because I can completely change I can give you a completely different training set to my algorithm and says, this is the world, but it's a completely fictional world, and I haven't really solved any problem. So I was wondering whether any of you had any thoughts about this connection between, you know, intervention that mediate the connection between fairness and bias. Thanks.
Okay, can I try to address some of these points? So, because of course these are very important and open points, which I can just try to elaborate. This also came to my mind when Riccardo was talking. So we have a huge problem, I believe, in computer science in general, because the concept of ethics, and specifically also research ethics, has been brought forward quite late. Now, at least in human-computer interaction nowadays, anytime that you use data or you bring forward some elaboration of human behavior, you are required to put forward your ethical consent and what have you done to actually ensure, and that is not only your perspective, because as we say, bias are relative. It's all dependent on what are your values, where you want to go, what you want to bring forward. But for many, many years, and at least in the field which is closer to the social science, where I believe certain type of topics have been brought forward earlier, it's only in the last 2 or 3 years where you are required to actually demonstrate where did you scrape your data from? Why did you do it? Did you have consent How did you actually select certain things? What are the implications? But on the other hand, with also the type of sensibilities which I'm seeing emerging mainly in academia, when the commercial interests jump on board, then this is much more difficult to deal with. And I think that as academics, at least I'm talking for the part of us who are academics, but also as journalists, as people who have a possibility to have an impact on the other people, it's actually to bringing forward, at least putting some question mark in the mind of people, asking, for instance, if it has to be like that, what could be done differently, and then probably something is going to change.
Yeah, I totally agree with Antonella, meaning that at this point I've seen lots of investigative journalists trying to open up these algorithms. So I'm glad that we haven't said the word black box in this discussion, because it's something that I don't like to use for algorithms. I don't think we should consider them black boxes. And basically, I was also interested in the question of Paolo, which is like, yeah, it's quite, I think it's quite difficult to decide how to do that. I think that a couple of days ago, I encountered this example of a software, basically one of those artificial intelligence software included within Amazon Web Services. And there was one of those of their researchers that basically collect the data sets, I think from Chicago or another major US city, regarding speed limits fines taken by basically the camera speed limit fine. So they were trying to predict in which parts of the cities, in which neighborhood there would be another fine. So where to place, for example, speed limits, speed checks, or something like that. But then at the same time, some other studies proved that these automatic checks on speed limits were more present in Black neighborhood. So in the end, you get, like, for example, more fines for Black people. How does that algorithm can make good predictions? But again, as you said, Paolo, are we going to end up in feeding fake data in order to somehow balance the training data sets and creating a fake world? Or we should just, for example, in the case of that algorithm, stop and say, okay, we have an issue which is in the real world, which won't be solved by an algorithm, which would mean that we need to tackle first the issues of speed limits fines. And yeah.
Can I jump in again? If
Sure.
And I think that so the second of you, or what you said, second option. So the main problem that seems to be happening here is that people trust these models and act on the models, and they close the loop and create reinforcement of what the models have learned. In this case, okay, well, you know, if this is a high crime rate zone, then I deploy my police there. That's a classic example. And then basically I've created more data that reinforce the premises of the model. Okay, so if you, I think, so breaking this loop, which contains humans and the way the humans trust the models, is a educational and cultural issue, and it can be done. And it's probably much easier, maybe not as exciting for statisticians, but it's for the rest of us, I think, is the weak spot where we can actually intervene and break the loop. And there's lots of good examples of this reinforcement in the Weapons of Mass Destruction book that some of you might know, I guess. Yes, I see people nodding. So I think we're all kind of on the same page here. I'm going to send a link here on in the Ada Lovelace Institute in the UK, which is dedicated to the study of ethics in AI, which is kind of a sister institute to the Alan Turing Institute, which is really for data science.
Thank you, Paolo.
Thanks, thanks again.
Yeah, and I think it's useful to deepen this point. Recollect a sentence made by Federico at the very beginning in the chat. So to understand and he said that it was less important for him the intent, so the purpose, but speaking about racism, but more interesting should be the consequences. So what an attitude, a behavior, an action build. So what are the consequences? So what happens next? And I think transparency in the collection of data made in websites and from agency and companies, transparency should be the main issue. So I declare what I am taking this data for, and then I admit what I am doing with them. Can we put in this term? Asking to Riccardo or Antonella, if you want to say.
Well, I think definitely it would be useful. I was dealing with some artificial intelligence project funded under Horizon 2020, and I find it quite interesting that those kinds of questions were missing. So, for example, they ask you, there is an ethical check on what kind of data, but this is only if you do genetics, if I don't remember mistakenly. But when it comes to collecting this kind of data to train algorithms, question of consent, question of privacy, all of them were missing. So I was like, okay, the European Union is funding artificial intelligence projects, but they're not properly doing this kind of background check, which right now, I think there should be, like, for example, the main starting point. I'm not sure what you think about this.
Thank you. Antonella, please.
I think that there is a movement in research which is moving towards this direction. But once again, here I like to stress that research sometimes is biased. We are biased by our founders. So, for instance, European research is actually suffering of this a bit less, but we are also more disadvantaged because we get less industrial money. I have very good friends in the States who actually have to cut out on this question because they are not appreciated. Consider that, I don't know if you have followed the story of Facebook. Facebook is a very large research center. They are very active, at least in the conferences I go to. And at the moment, they are in a very lucky situation because they are the only one who have the data. At the moment, you cannot publish anything anymore which has been done using Facebook data if you haven't asked all the type of requirements, approvals to them, to your own institution and everything. But Facebook a couple of years ago did a very large social experiment by which it actually attributed millions of users to random positive or negative questions in order to see how would that have induced a certain type of behavior. This paper was originally published in a mid-tier, I would say, a psychology journal, up to the point in which somebody started asking, guys, what have you done? That's actually mass manipulation. And at the end, it's been withdrawn and number of people have been changed by key research roles. But that has demonstrated that for a few months, something absolutely random, because the experimental design was so badly planned that they cannot even be sure of what they have induced on people. They were just randomly trying to send, now I send Paolo happy news and Riccardo sad news, and I want to see how does that affect. But this thing happened a few years ago when nobody knew of that.
Yeah, thank you very much for these examples. This enlight, the possible manipulation in this holacracy of who has the data. Okay, thank you very much. If we don't have any other question, I think we ran out of time. So you were very patient. You stayed all together with us, and it's a pleasure. I'd like to say to you that we are going in a few months to recall for the campus. So we are doing this transparent experiment in Bolzano. A conversation, a debate. We will use design thinking to understand issues in Bolzano and to understand how artificial intelligence could be used as a way to debate and understand better how to have an impact in issues. We still don't know what will be the theme. So could be green mobility, sustainability, governance, participation issues. We still don't know. We will construct with the participants of this campus. And so if you stay connected with Make It Visible, the project, the main project, and the newsletter, we are going to inform you about all this process going on.
Yes, so, Tommaso, just words. Thanks to everybody for the very interesting intervention. I just forgot to mention Cineglossa, our main partner. Thanks to Federico Bomba, the president of Cineglossa, and I hope you will join us soon. And it's very important to go deeper inside these challenges and these themes we now talk together. So I hope you would like to follow us again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for your contribution to the speakers, to the attendees, and it was very enriching. So with all these links and debates, and we will public in some way, still we don't know, all these outputs, so as an intellectual outputs. So it will be very interesting to make it transparent, also these interventions.
Exactly.
Okay.
Emiliano and Tommaso for organizing it and for inviting us to talk. I personally found it very stimulating and I got something to think about.
Yeah,
it's
me
a
too.
pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Somehow soon without any distance and camera.
Exactly.
Bye-bye.
Also,
Okay.
thank you to the attendees
Thank
for
you
bearing with us.
Actually, can you make sure you save also the chats and the questions? Because for me, it was a bit difficult to follow online.
Yeah, for sure. It's all saved, and we'll manage all these informations. And thanks to Make It Visible, and we are reporting because it's a bigger project. So we are reporting all our debates and our interventions, the links. All these polls will be transparent. So not only for us, for the project planners, but also for all the world. And I say bye-bye to you. Thank you for
saying bye-bye, Massimiliano. Do you want to put your links and where people can find the information, maybe in the chat if they want? Like
Yes. Of course, I'm going to write down the website, but you can follow also our newsletter. The project is Make It Visible. I'm going to write down. Here you can find the recordings also of the previous web talks.
Okay, and see you soon then. Thank you.
And engage different people. This is
exactly. A big community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.